Hello, hello! The name is Russell, and I am an Englishman. My family once had a vast fortune, but now I am as poor can be. But I plan on changing that as soon as possible, for within this desolate forest next to the road, I shall build my own company, my own organization where I will make my fortune. We're currently on a main trading path between a few different tribes, the Prussians, the French, and the British. A more than optimal place for any type of business, I'd say. For you see, my friends, we're currently on a Earth-like planet that is actually a Pangea with many different types of hostile and gentle tribes, as well as the Prussians, British, and French, as mentioned a moment ago. I would, of course, like to disclose, though, that the tribes used in this video and in this game save have nothing to do with real-life tribes, as they are fictional, okay? Even though we are using some real-life factions like the British and so on and so forth. Now then, shall we begin? Indeed, I think we shall. To begin, we're going to start off with a little bit of deforestation. The reason being, of course, everything and anything uses and is made by wood in this day and age. Structures are built by wood, we use wood for torches, etc, etc. Thankfully, among a few other different skills, Russell here is actually pretty decent at cutting down trees. He's not quite as good at crafting things, but utilizing some of the logs that we had cut down, we would end up crafting ourselves a small short bow. A normal quality short bow with an average shooting skill should do quite nicely when we're on the hunt. For our first prey and our dinner, we decided to hunt down a stallion in the forest, a wild horse as it were, quite common to the region. After hunting down our very first prey, we would then go back home to set up camp for the night, building a small campfire out of some pebbles on the ground and some of the wood we cut. Utilizing some of the sharper stones, we would also butcher the horse on the ground, wasting much of its meat unfortunately, but it'll be a while before we have a proper butchering table. We would, however, end up grilling several of the chunks of its flesh on some sticks that night for dinner, just before we used the leather from killing the horse to make ourselves a nice sleeping bag before finally going off to bed. I think we're doing quite well for ourselves. The first night here, we'll have a camp, but very soon we shall have a booming empire and/or business. Mark my words, friends, we are going to make something of ourselves. And thus it begins. The very next morning, we would utilize much of the wood that we had cut down, as well as cutting down much more of said wood here in the forest, to make ourselves a very large, what could only be described as a cabin, for now, I suppose. Though, given what I plan on doing with it, I suppose that the term haberdashery may have a better ring to it, and also a much better meaning behind it for its purpose. You see, my friends, not only shall I, Russell, be living here, but we will also be renting this place out to anyone who has the coins. Except for our enemies, the French, and the more hostile tribes, of course. Within this haberdashery, not only would Russell end up having his very own room, which sure as hell beats sleeping out on the ground, but we also had a nice, warm, and toasty fireplace for all to enjoy. We did use up most of our resources though, so for a day or so we would have to do nothing but spend more time cutting down trees day in and day out. We would, however, make time in our busy schedule of cutting down trees to plant a large row of potatoes. That way we don't end up starving to death when winter rears its ugly frozen head. After spending so much time cutting down more and more trees, we finally had a large stockpile of wood which we would use to furnish our haberdashery. As you can see, we added in 3 beds, some dressers to go with, a small bookshelf, as well as a nice table to eat at, and a large log pile by the fire to keep it going. Not only would we build these beds, but we would make sure that they were ready for any and all guests, setting their price at $10 per night, which just so happens to be the cheapest that we can set them. Not to worry though, my friends, Russell didn't forget about himself. He too would use the wood to go about building himself a proper bed, a nice table to eat his meals in the morning, as well as a potted plant, a dresser, and all the other amenities we needed. A bit of time later though, and we had our very first visitors, a Prussian bulk goods trader. Unfortunately, they were on their way to a nearby British city and thus did not want to stay in our haberdashery for the night, but we could end up trading with him. They were willing to buy many of the logs that we had been cutting down, thankfully, making ourselves a pretty penny. Not only our first bits and bobs of silver from our very first sale, but 186 bobs of silver, I'll say, a pretty decent amount. Now that we're really making something of ourselves and we're collecting a lot of different types of resources, I thought that it might be a good idea that we had a proper place to put all of said resources, and thus, just next to Russell's room, we ended up building a small storage area for all of our stone blocks and yada yada yada. We would also end up building ourselves 2 large food baskets to store all of our potatoes once those are grown and our current storage of berries. With that, my friends, Russell's haberdashery is off to a pretty good start. We have plenty of room to store things, we have a nice place to lay our heads for the night, as well as for many of our guests who are sure to come. Well, speak of the devil, would you look at this, a few days later we finally have our very first guest, a small little group of our kinsmen, the good old redcoats as they are. They would all take shelter and refuge in our haberdashery for a few nights, making us a pretty little pocket full of coin. Only about 30 or so, but in total we should have enough to buy ourselves a nice musket or something along those lines. And if they enjoy their stay in our nice comfortable beds in our warm haberdashery, they'll very well end up coming back and spending more of that money, as will their colleagues. We were off to a bit of a rocky start though, as none of them had anything to eat, so we quickly ran outside and began picking some berries. They probably won't enjoy that, so we'll need to try and find a better solution. But we were interrupted when we had a traveler by the name of Woodart who was apparently seeking out 30 silver. Funny enough, just the amount of silver that we had made from our British soldiers staying the night, and apparently she had some debt to pay off to some pirates. Now, she did have some pretty good skills. She was a careful shooter, even though she was a high mate who's also incapable of violence, which also means she probably can't protect herself against these pirates, and thus we decided to arrest her. I know, but truth be told, it is for her own good. She can't protect herself from pirates, only we can do that, and if she's in debt, there's no telling what they'll do even if she does pay off this debt, so really we did her a favor. She was a bit on the younger side, around about 13 or so maybe we could take her under our wing and teach her how to be a proper host of a haberdashery, and she could help us out here. In the meantime, a porcupine out in the woods went absolutely batshit insane and decided to try and attack us, thus we ended up shooting it a few times, killing it with an arrow. Womp womp. On the bright side though, we would be able to butcher it and cook it into some meals for our new friends that are staying around. Since things can get quite boring around these parts, especially during the winter time when a blizzard comes and you're stuck inside, I decided to make a chess table to keep our minds occupied, and I'm sure our guest will enjoy it as well. I also felt that our business could use a bit of beautifying around the front, and thus I decided to build a small wooden fence around the area with a large sign. Although I can't actually put anything on it, just imagine it has something about our haberdashery. I would also end up going to both ends of the road on the map and putting some small signs as well, that way they know that our business is nearby. Hopefully this brings in more potential customers. After a few days, it was finally time for the soldiers to depart, and unfortunately it would seem that they were very disappointed by their stay, possibly because I didn't have enough food for them, or possibly because of that damn dirty porcupine, somehow. Either way, I refused to take the blame for the situation. To address the food issue, I decided to build something of a food storage area as well as a slaughterhouse. You'll notice that this building is going to have an embrasure as part of the walls, and that is because we're going to be letting the cold fall and winter air in when those seasons come around to keep the food frozen for us. We must use Mother Nature to our advantage. Speaking of food though, I noticed that we had a wild woman who had wandered into the area and was picking some of our potatoes out of the field without asking to eat. Well, I immediately began working on an axe, that way we could smash her over the head with it and kill her, but I decided to opt for shooting her in the back with an arrow instead, and after say 5 or 6 arrows later, we had finally slaughtered her. I felt kind of bad about it because she was just hungry, but it needed to be done. We would end up giving her a proper grave and burial site, and that's about the least we can do, to be honest with you. By this point, we had also finally recruited Woodart, and she was a perfect helping hand, running around, sweeping up the place. She had wonderful ideas like giving our faction and our business a name as well. We ended up naming ourselves the Russell's Ruffians just to scare off and intimidate any would-be bandits or pirates, and we ended up calling the business the Shady Forest Haberdashery. By the end of this video, you'll have heard that word so many times you'll be sick and tired of it, which you probably already are. Sorry. Woodart, once again, as mentioned, is the perfect helping hand. With our first harvest of potatoes, she was helping us haul everything in while conversating with Russell. The two of them were easily becoming fast friends. Now then, to address our quality problems here at the business, we are actually going to be building 2 separate rooms to put some of our beds in, as I'm sure our next guest would enjoy their privacy in their own personal room. I'm sure our last guest would as well, but too late for that. Simple but effective quality rooms with some bookshelves and other amenities. Now, it's important to remember that I do have the props mod, which will pretty up these rooms, although those types of things cost silver, and we don't want to spend all that much money just yet. We would also go out and begin hunting down some wildlife, such as this lynx here, who we would then butcher, and we would actually end up building a taxidermy bench. What this will allow us to do is mount its pretty little head on a piece of wood, which we can then hang in one of these new rooms, beautifying it ever more. Folks tend to really enjoy having a dead animal's head on the wall. It gives a cozy cabin kind of vibe. It seems that we've been making improvements just in time, as we have some tribal visitors from a nearby village. I'm sure these weary travelers are quite tired and are looking for a nice place to rest their legs. There was an issue, however, as 3 of them would end up taking our beds, but some of them were sleeping outside, and this just would not do. Until we could cut down enough wood to go about building some more rooms, for the time being, we're actually going to be renting out some wooden canopies just in our backyard. Now, these will be the cheapest price of $10 because, well, they're pretty shabby and shitty, to be honest with you. Because of that, I'm also going to up the price of the bed on the inside to $20. That way, it is a more acceptable price compared to the canopies. Thankfully, this plan would end up working out, and though, once again, these are not the greatest of accommodations, they're better than nothing. Given all the predators in the area, such as grizzly bears and wargs, these could make the difference between life and death while you're sleeping. Back inside the haberdashery, as our guests were warming up by the fireplace, I would also end up building a wood stove with a nice limestone foundation underneath. Now that our food storage area is just west of the haberdashery, it only makes sense that we would have a proper stove on the inside closer to where the food is for cooking. But I'm afraid our hospitality is going to have to be put on hold for a moment, as we have a group of Frenchmen coming to attack us. Looks like it's only a couple of soldiers, but this lady and gent are wielding muskets, and against our short bow, I fear we may be outgunned. The 2 of them ran straight into our backyard to light our wooden canopies on fire. Russell met them out there and started firing multiple arrows at him, but unfortunately he was hit twice with a musket, causing him to bleed profusely. Because of this, we would have him pull back, grab a spike trap, and reinstall it around the corner of the building. The hope was that we could try to lure the French into it, but they were a little bit too occupied with burning all of our crops and our canopies at the moment. While they were doing that, though, this would be an optimal time for Russell to begin patching up his bullet wound so he doesn't bleed out. Thankfully, our little spike trap idea would end up working out, and the male Frenchman would end up getting killed by it. With his corpse on the ground, his musket would be up for grabs, which we could then use to kill his partner, but she ended up stepping on a spike trap as well and killing herself. And with that, my friends, the battle was over. The only thing left for us to do was to go about putting out all of these fires that they had started, but luckily the rain came and helped us out a little bit. As an Englishman, this battle brings me great pride, but also just in general, because we were outnumbered 2 to 1. With Woodart being incapable of violence, we could have very well died out there without any hope of being rescued. The biggest issue that we ended up facing from the raid, though, is the fact that the canopies were burnt down, and our tribal guests were quite upset about that, seeing how they had paid good money for them, and thus they were displeased. Yet another disappointed guest. If not for those damn Frenchmen, they would have loved their stay here. But nevertheless, we must continue pushing. And in doing so, this also means that we must continue pushing our quality to its very limits, the best that it can be. And to go about doing this, we're going to build a few separate cabins across the road from our haberdashery for people to rent out as well. You'll notice that these aren't too different from the rooms in the main building itself, although we do have a wagon in case they need to store any of their baggage outside instead of inside their rooms, and we also have some firewood out back so they can keep themselves nice and toasty. Now, we also want to try to build some of our own vehicles like a horse-drawn wagon, and to go about doing so, we're going to need to be able to feed the horses, and so thus we decided to plant a very small field outside our food storage area for hay. Once again, our progress has been impeded when we got an attack from some tribal impids, though it appeared to only be one gentleman who was going to throw some some rocks at our heads. Needless to say, with our newfound musket from the French, we were none too impressed. As we fired at him from the tree line, he would toss his pebbles, but we made the mistake of getting a little bit too close and he attempted to catch us on fire. But then we shot him in the heart and he ended up dying. Turns out I think he was actually a she, but that's alright, we don't discriminate. Our musket is an equal opportunity killer. By this point it was now fall, and with winter just around the corner, we decided to begin collecting resources such as plenty of wood, heel root, as well as berries. At some point we would end up having a British bulk goods trader who had stopped in at the haberdashery, and though we had collected this wood to keep our fires burning this winter, we decided to sell it all off to them. And this ended up making us 1,625 pieces of silver. Whoa, mama. We would also end up having a lore keeper by the name of Nina looking to join the colony. We're not one to shy away from some free labor, so of course we accepted and she would join us shortly thereafter. We were tickled plum pink to have her here with us, especially once we got a good look at that skill set. She was a nimble lore keeper who was great at crafting, construction, and melee. Absolutely splendid. A great addition to our staff. But with our growing population of staff, I thought it'd be best for us to go ahead and build 3 cabins for each of us. That way we're not sleeping in any of the guest beds back at the business. They were nothing too fancy, just 3 simple little homes, enough to keep you warm during the winter and what have you. So one of the best parts about our little housing solution here is that we could actually rent out Russell's old room and turn it into a guest bedroom. Speaking of which, we have yet another group of British soldiers coming through the area looking to rent out some rooms. Now's our time to shine and to leave a good impression. Whereas we had failed previously, I'm hoping that they'll be quite delighted with their stay this time around. As they're enjoying their stay, I noticed that it is getting to be late fall and temperatures have absolutely plummeted. And unless we want to stay inside all winter and play chess by the fire instead of going outside and working around our property, we're going to need some proper clothing. So we quickly threw together a nice little tailoring bench out in our slaughterhouse, mostly because there's plenty of leather out there from all the dead animals anyhow, and we started throwing together some coats for everyone to keep us nice and snuggly warm. Believe you me, friends, we are going to need them. The wind around these parts could cut a fella in half. And with the potential of frostbite during the winter, that's actually a pretty accurate possibility, I'd say. A little bit of time later, and our Prussian friends, I called them British a moment ago, which was an oopsie daisy, were so tickled and delighted with their stay, they actually left us some uranium as a tip. My lord, well, it's about time we started getting some good reviews for our hospitality. Hopefully they'll tell their friends and colleagues as well. In the meantime, we've been doing quite a bit of mining to collect some steel, but in this particular vein of steel along the road, we plan on putting something special. More on that in a moment. Because right now, we're going to begin lighting the way to the haberdashery in the icy cold dark of winter with some proper steel streetlights. With these bad boys glowing in the dark, there's no way anyone could miss our big, beautiful wooden sign. I feel like they're pretty inviting as well, kind of like, come on in, sit down, get a bed, and get a bite of stew or something. We would also utilize some of what little bit of hay we actually managed to harvest this season to attract some horses so that we could tie them to a wooden wagon, giving us, as you could guess, a horse-drawn wagon. Now, a horse-drawn wagon is going to be useful for many different things, just like trading and things like that I believe I mentioned earlier, but it's also going to be great for a getaway if we're getting attacked and overwhelmed by any enemies trying to take over our haberdashery or what have you, and also for just fighting in combat or getting around the map, as the drawn wagon is much faster than walking, as I'm sure you could guess. And with winter finally beginning and some very thick snow on the ground already, we needed all the help that we could get. It was during this icy frozen season that we mostly just tried to focus on bettering our property and our business. In terms of that, we were making some taxidermied buffalo heads and hanging up in all the rooms, increasing their quality. But also the steel vein on the edge of the road that we were mining out, we decided to turn this into something of a makeshift prison. Of course, we're no government entity and we're just a private company, so we don't care if anyone's actually punished for any misdoings. We want to try and imprison people to go about recruiting them into our company, and that way they can help us out by working around the place a bit. So we made this a very nice and comfortable prison, where our motto is you don't have to learn your lesson, you just have to earn us some coin, eh? But back at the haberdashery, to go about improving it furthermore, we were actually going to to build some proper rugs on the inside to completely beautify the entire place and all of the rooms that we rent. To give the place a more professional look, we would also go about building some wooden archways around our doors. We also moved the chess table over by the fireplace so it would have a nice scenic view, and we would build some nice comfortable blue fur chairs instead of the wooden chairs that we've previously been using for it. That way you can rest your booty in a soft little area. We are prioritizing and maximizing comfort, my friends. You'll also notice a few different little things here and there, like the cupboard that has some spices on top, a nice firewood log pile, a large bookshelf, things like that that actually come from the props mod that you can also find in the mod list in the video description, along with all the other mods in this video. As time went on, I realized that some of our less financially endowed, you could say, guests couldn't afford any of the rooms at 30 silver per night, so we had to fix that little problem once more. We ended up throwing together some pretty simple tents out of all the plain leather from all the animals that we had been hunting, and we would actually put these at 10 silver per night. They're much better than wooden canopies, much more comfortable than wooden canopies, but they can still be quite cheap. And it beats dying from frostbite, so there's that. But it would seem that our old friends, the French, have come back once more to try and scalp us, skin us, and wear us like fur coats. Not if we have anything to say about it though, of course. As they began to approach our small and up-and-coming town, we began to take defensive positions within our buildings. Along our western side, Nina would engage in a musket shootout with one of the soldiers, while along the eastern flank, the rest of the soldiers were trying to creep up on us, while the incapable of violence Woodart began running them all over with a horse-drawn wagon. As it would turn out, she's a bit more capable than we gave her credit for, I'd say. But the soldiers weren't done there, as they began to make their way towards Russell and Nina, who took them down easily with an axe and a knife respectively. Utilizing the power of teamwork and friendship, Nina and Russell would begin engaging more of these soldiers closer to our haberdashery and our rooms that we rent out, and we easily ended up taking them down together as well. I must say that I was truly impressed by their teamwork. The two of them really are the dynamic duo. As they were joining up here with Woodart, she was actually tending to one of the French soldiers, as we had hoped to maybe try to reintegrate him back into society as a proper Englishman instead. But the chance of a Frenchman becoming a proper Englishman is something like a snowball's chance in hell, so instead we just have to settle for recruiting him. We could use a helping hand around the place anyhow. Now then, with as well as our business has been doing, I thought that it might be a good idea for us to go ahead and give Russell a proper room, since he's quickly on his way to becoming quite the little slumlord, making a fat stack of cash and or silver every so often. Of course, we need to give him a proper home to himself to match. Not only is it a great status symbol of his wealth and his reputation, of course, to give him his own proper little cabin like this, but of course it is also going to help him with any mood breaks and things like that, and it'll keep him quite happy. Given the frequency that we're getting attacked by impid tribes as well as the French and any other enemies of ours, I thought it might be a good idea for us to go ahead and begin working on some proper defenses. First and foremost, we're going to be working on some swivel guns. That way, if we have a large group of French or anyone attacking like we just had, we'll be able to blow them all up at once, or at least that's the idea. A bit of time later, and we had a gentleman by the name of Martin, who just so happens to be a civil servant who was being chased by a pack of 11 man-hunting squirrels, and of course, if we offered him sanctuary here at the haberdashery, he was willing to join us, so we accepted. Martin would arrive some odd hours later, hoveling around in the snow on his way to our safety here, but unfortunately not too far behind him on his trail hot were the squirrels. These rambunctious rodents were out for blood. We began firing upon them with our muskets, as you know, but unfortunately, due to the inaccuracy of muskets given the time period, it was quite hard for us to shoot them. It was due to this unfortunate circumstance that some of them even made their way inside of our haberdashery. Back outside, however, we were running them over with the wagon, stomping them to death, and on rare occasion, even managing to shoot them with our muskets. Finally, we had finished off the horde of these little bastards, and we were victorious. Not only that, but in doing so, it would seem that we've stayed within Martin's good graces, and he is indeed going to stay here and make this place his permanent home, and also work for us for free. To celebrate the absolute annihilation of these bloody squirrels, Russell decided to throw a party. It was a real hoedown of sorts. Everybody was dancing, playing some chess, and even roasting some squirrel bits on the open fire. A beautiful occasion. But once again, returning to our idea of defending our home here and protecting ourselves as well as all of our guests, of course, we would begin building some large log wooden walls. Now, I do specifically specify that these are log walls here because we just knocked down the trees and then threw them up into walls, essentially, because logs are much thicker than normal wooden planks, of course, and also given the time period, I think that they are very aesthetically pleasing. Given all the wood that we've been cutting down, though, it wouldn't take us very long at all for us to finish up the western flank, and then we had finished up the northern flank, finally being completed on the eastern side with a wall that almost completely surrounds the entire colony. However, you may notice that there are two openings on each side. Now, of course, this is for us to go in and out as we please, and we also have a few doors throughout these walls for the exact same purpose, but these large openings are also so trade caravans can come in, and more importantly, so that when our enemies do come to attack us, they will be funneled in through small spaces, allowing us to leave little room for error when firing musket balls at them. And if for some reason on the eastern side they are foolish enough to try and wade through the icy cold water to get here, they'll die just as easily. It was during this time that we had finally recruited the Frenchman known as Zug, and we were more than happy to have him among our ranks finally. We had even taught him how to speak the King's English, by golly. We were so proud of him. But I noticed there's one little problem. He still has that filthy French uniform on. So, we had him take it out back by the slaughterhouse and burn it, and we watched it go up in flames. Now that we finally have more helping hands and we're expanding our business and our company out that way, it's time for us to begin expanding in another way as well by adding in more rooms for folks to rent out. Adding in these additional 3 rooms to our repertoire will give us a total of 9, with 6 of them being the $20 rooms and the other 3 being our $30 rooms within the haberdashery itself. The more fancy and convenient rooms, if you will. This may not seem like a big deal, but this was quite crucial as we get trade caravans coming through here all the time, and they always have a lot of members. But as we continue getting more staff as well, we also need to build some proper cabins for them, and thus we would end up doing so for Zug. I think he enjoyed it. Sure as hell beats sleeping outside in those overflow tents, which I guess technically isn't outside, but it's ice cold for sure. About a day or so later though, and we would actually start on our largest construction project yet on the property. In the northwestern corner, not too far away from our protective walls, we would end up building a fairly large-sized barn. We would have 4 stalls where we can keep our animals once we end up taming some of those, like some other horses that aren't attached to a wagon, and in the main back here we can also keep plenty of hay to keep our wagons stocked full of fuel, as well as feeding other types of animals, of course, and we would also be able to park our wagon itself in here, which was pretty great. It was during this construction of our barn that Russell managed to charm Nina into being his lover. He managed to achieve this by making fun of her diet. Okay, well, nevertheless, the silver-tongued devil seemed to weasel his way into her heart, and now the two of them truly are in love. Yet another of Russell's amazing achievements this video. Things are really looking up for him, and it looks like they're only getting better as today is Christmas Day, a joyous day of celebration. Speaking of which, it would seem that we have a trade caravan of British soldiers, of course, and they have just what the doctor ordered. It's been God knows how long since we've had a proper cup of tea, and now with all of our riches, we could easily trade some of our things to barter for these cups of tea, or even purchase them if we'd like. After trading off some of our belongings, such as our leathers from all of our hunting escapades, we got a lot of tea, and we also made a pretty penny of silver as well. Absolutely perfect for a Christmas celebration. But as the hours began to wind down, and our party was just around the corner, Russell decided to change his look up a bit. Ooh la la, now that is a hairdo befitting of a lord. Now, whether or not he's a noble lord or a slum lord in the middle of the forest renting out rooms to lowly peasants for coins, that's up to you. Because right now, my friends, I have no time to decide, as we have a hippin' hoppin' party for Christmas. We would even cut down some nice pine trees from outside to bring in and begin decorating with a few gifts for one another underneath the trees. We sat around the table warmed by by our wood-fired heater, and not only enjoying each other's company, but also enjoying warm cups of tea as well. Of course, though, tea wasn't the only pleasantry that we decided to indulge in when Woodart and Russell joined us at the table and began lighting up a few cigarettes. As a snowy blizzard formed outside and we battened down the doors, we would continue passing the hours playing chess by the fire. Martin was quiet as a mouse, Nina had tightened her blouse. I'm not very good at rhymes, but sometimes I like to pretend to be a mouse. Happy holidays, guys, and a big Merry Christmas as well. I'll see you next time.